Celebrating its 35th anniversary this year, Epcot is iconic and beloved by many. Today it has a lot of unique experiences and festivals to offer. When it opened in 1982, however, it was lacking in the rides department, only starting with 5. For a $1.4 billion park, why weren't there more? Today, Epcot is seen as one of the 4 theme parks in Disney World, but back in 1982, Epcot was meant to be so much more than that. You see, prior to the creation of Disney World, Walt had envisioned Epcot to be a functional city of the future that people would live in. If you want to know more on that, I'll link to another video I made a while back all about the city concept at the end of this video. Needless to say, but the city concept never came to fruition, and the construction of Disney World had to go forward without Walt. His older brother Roy had overseen the construction of what was Phase 1 of Disney World, which included the Magic Kingdom and its nearby resorts. Phase 2 was to be Epcot. Unfortunately, after the Magic Kingdom opened, Roy passed away as well, and for the first time ever, Disney wasn't run by a Disney. It would take years before the company decided to address the looming question of what to do about Epcot, and when they did, it was decided that without Walt to lead the way, an actual city just wasn't plausible for them. Instead, they conceptualized a sort of year-round World's Fair called World Showcase. Similar to the New York World's Fair, it would feature pavilions hosted by nations around the world to show guests what life and culture was like back in their country. World Showcase was planned to open in 1979, at which point Disney would begin work on another area called the Future World Theme Center, which similarly would feature pavilions sponsored by leaders in industry to show the public what they had in store. It was only after Disney struggled and failed to find adequate funding for World Showcase that they thought to merge the two ideas together into one single project, Epcot Center. I mention all of this because these roots explain why Epcot wasn't built as a typical theme park. After all, at this point Disney had never had a second gate. Just 15 years earlier, Walt wasn't even sure if there was enough demand for a Disney on the East Coast, never mind a second theme park just 5 minutes away. Disney was constantly concerned with making sure that Epcot Center was not in any way relatable to the Magic Kingdom and Disneyland. They even insisted that none of the classic Disney characters show up in Epcot, instead opting to create a new one specifically for the park, which is why we have Figment. So for all intents and purposes, while Epcot Center wasn't going to be Walt's city of the future, it wasn't going to be a theme park either. It was intended to be a perpetual World's Fair mixed with elements of theme park design. This is why Epcot leaned heavily on exhibits and shows rather than rides. Now that said, even the New York World's Fair had some rides. In fact, it was Walt who worked on some of the most popular among them. However, even those experiences differed from what people came to expect out of a theme park ride. Where the Magic Kingdom offered short, thrilling, and immersive attractions meant to entertain, the World's Fair, and as a result Epcot Center, focused on slower experiences that valued education alongside entertainment. So conceptually, it's fair to say that Disney wasn't concerned with packing Epcot full of rides to begin with. But nevertheless, over the years, they did have plans to offer some e-ticket experiences to balance out the educational side of it all. Some examples of these attractions include a Mount Fuji roller coaster in Japan, a bullet train ride in Japan, and a Switzerland pavilion with an East Coast version of the Matterhorn bobsleds. Why didn't we get them? Well, World Showcase as a whole ended up not going as smoothly as Disney had hoped. You see, like they did with rides and companies, Disney's plan was to reach out to nations around the world in hopes that they'd sponsor their own country's pavilion at Epcot Center. In theory, it made sense because this is exactly what was done for World Fairs in the past, and Epcot was intended to be a year-round World's Fair. The problem was in that year-round bit. Sponsorship contracts were 10-year commitments, and while it was one thing to get a company to commit to funding their attraction for 10 years, it wasn't as simple for governments. For some of the countries, the government could see leadership change multiple times over in that 10-year period, making the budgeting for such a long commitment difficult. On top of that, while private industry mostly had themselves to worry about, governments had a nation of citizens to look out for, which made it harder to justify the spending. As First Lady of the Philippines Imelda Marcos put it after a presentation, $9 million is an astronomical figure for us. If I had that much money, I would not spend it on a pavilion in Florida to try and attract more tourists to Manila. I would use it to build sanitation facilities and schools and such for my people. Eventually, Disney gave up on going after governments and instead sought out private companies within those countries. While they did have better luck that way, it ultimately wasn't enough, nor was it fast enough, and as a result, the more expensive e-ticket ideas were the first to go. During planning, Disney estimated that Epcot Center would open with between 10 and 17 national pavilions and World Showcase. Come 1982, it would open with just 9. Of the 9, there would be only one ride, El Rio del Tiempo in Mexico. When you combine Disney's struggle to bring rides to the World Showcase portion of the park and their decision to design the park more like a World's Fair and less like a theme park, you end up with an opening day comprised of just 5 rides. As for today, the focus and goal of Epcot has obviously changed. The slower and educational-centric attractions have been replaced one by one with more thrilling offerings, such as Mission Space, Test Track, and the upcoming Guardians of the Galaxy's ride. Whether that's a good or a bad thing is up for debate, and it's certainly something the internet has been debating for a while now. In any case, if you find yourself in Epcot, wondering why this theme park just doesn't have a ton of rides like the Magic Kingdom does, just remember that at one point, it was hard to even call it a theme park.